Lisa, I think I'll turn it over to you. We can see your slides perfectly.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. I want to thank Mark and Kim for inviting us, Kim Grant, the Energy Manager. I'm with Michael Rossi from PSD on behalf of Mass Save. He's a code consultant. This is an abbreviated presentation that will talk about a little bit about specialized and climate leaders, which is why you're entertaining specialized opt-in code. And I want to reiterate that if the town chooses to put this on the warrant, we would offer a public information session to the public virtually or a hybrid mode so that we could answer any additional questions that might come up from the public, and you could further post that. And if builders and developers, et cetera, wanted to come, it would be available to you.
Great, thank you.
So this is just a slide that shows you the designated green communities and certified climate leader communities. There's 298 green communities, and there's 19 climate leader communities now, and there's a new designation round coming for climate leaders that will be announced shortly. We had applications due in June, and we're anticipating announcing probably another similar amount. So we'll probably be up to 40 very shortly, at least. I just wanted to show you the evolution from the Green Communities program to the Climate Leader Community program. So Green Communities is not going away. We're still going to be servicing the green communities and offering grants to communities. So Climate Leaders is a choice, and specialized opt-in is a choice. So on the left side, you have the green communities criteria, which Orleans meets all of those. You have adopted as of right siting, adopted expedited permitting process for that as of right zone, created an energy reduction plan to reduce energy use by 20% in 5 years. You agreed to a fuel efficient vehicle policy. So when you purchase new vehicles, you right size them and you meet a criteria. Certain vehicles over 8,500 pounds and police emergency response and fire emergency response vehicles are still exempt from that policy. And you minimize the life cycle costs in new construction because you adopted the stretch code. Climate Leaders, which you see on the right side of this slide, requires you to establish and maintain a local committee to advise, coordinate, and lead clean energy and climate activities. We understand some of these things take a grassroots approach and some coaching as well, like talking to your neighbors about heat pumps and the benefits of EVs, et cetera. You have to have a municipal decarbonization commitment, which could be something like a commitment that was adopted, a resolution at town meeting that might have said you're, following the state's goals, or you might have had one that was even adopted several years ago that said that you were aware of climate concerns and you embraced them and you were trying to reduce fossil fuels, for example. Or if you had a climate action plan either in process or adopted, that would serve as a municipal decarbonization commitment. There's an opportunity to create the municipal decarbonization roadmap with 2030 and 2050 goals, which Orleans did with the help of a consultant that was provided by DOER. And then the ZEV First policy is a policy that says you're going to choose electric vehicles first when you have a choice, or then plug-in hybrids or hybrids. And the backstop for that policy is the Green Communities fuel efficient vehicle policy that you're currently utilizing and enforcing. So if a hybrid doesn't work, or an electric vehicle doesn't work, or a plug-in hybrid doesn't work, then you're going to follow what's in the Green Communities fuel efficient vehicle policy. And then finally, it brings me to the specialized opt-in code, which is a more advanced option than the stretch code. So there's a few additional criteria or things that you have to meet, and your building official would be enforcing in new construction, both commercial and residential, and large-scale multifamily as well. And my colleague, Mike Rossi, will get to those things in just a few minutes, and then a Q&A period will follow. How do you adopt the specialized opt-in code? This is at town meeting, so it would be put on the November 17th town meeting warrant. You would need a majority vote. It's a bylaw, a general bylaw. And once it was adopted, you could have you would include an effective date. And in this case, adopting it in November, You could either choose to make it January 1 or July 1. I honestly would suggest a July 1 date for it to be effective, just to give the building community time to adjust to that. So if they pulled a permit on January 1, because you still have the time where the AG's office has to approve the warrant articles as well. So I think I would use, if you have the option, July 1 for your effective date. And then I just wanted to give you another heads up about the grants that are available to designated climate leaders. Should you become a designated climate leader, there are grants up to $1 million to certified climate leader communities. That's just in our first 3-year round. We're anticipating that we will be announcing additional grants. And we also have $150,000 technical assistance grants available to certified climate leaders. And this is the building code adoption by municipality. So there are 51 cities and towns on the base energy code, 247, actually 248. I don't know if you've heard, but Barnstable adopted the stretch code. Very exciting. That happened last week. So now the entire Cape is either on the stretch code or a more advanced code. So we have 248 on the stretch energy code, and the specialized energy code, we're up to 53 communities that have adopted. And then I'm going to turn this over to my colleague, Michael Rossi.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lisa. So hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having us. My name is Michael Rossi, and I'm a program manager and energy code specialist with Performance Systems Development. We provide energy code training and technical support on behalf of the Mass Save Codes and Standards Compliance and Support Initiative, and are also here to help support DOER with some of these presentations. So just to give a quick lay of the land in terms of how the energy codes are operating in Massachusetts, they do get a little confusing because, as Lisa alluded to, there's essentially 3 levels of it. So the first is, I will start by saying that all of these codes and the different iterations of them are based on a national model code, which is developed by the International Code Council, and that's called the International Energy Conservation Code, which is the 2021 version of that code. And Massachusetts essentially introduces amendments to that national model code to give it a little bit of unique flavor for the state. So what it does is add in some key amendments, which make it a little bit different than that national model version of the code. So as Lisa mentioned, you guys are a stretch code. And as part of that, you are on that Massachusetts amended version of the model code that is a little bit more efficient than what would be required as part of the base code. And now what we're here today to talk about is that specialized code, which is the top of the pyramid, essentially meeting the most efficient code that's offered by the state. And the code only applies to new construction and just has a couple additional provisions on top of the stretch code that you have to follow if you do adopt the specialized code. And we're going to talk about these in a little bit more detail in the following slides. So Lisa, if you want to advance the slide. So if you're building a new home that is all electric, and what that means is you're not using fossil fuels for space heating, water heating, cooking, or clothes drying, the requirements under the specialized code are the same as the code that you're currently following, the stretch code. So there's nothing new you have to do if you're building a new all-electric home. Now, if you're building a new mixed fuel home, and that, as I said, is a home that uses fossil fuels, whether that be gas, propane, oil, for new construction, that for space heating, water heating, cooking, and clothes drying, there are some additional provisions you have to follow under the specialized code. And the 2 pieces of it are installing a solar array on the property of a minimum of 4 kilowatts, as well as pre-wiring for future electrification. Now, what that means is any equipment you're using in the home that's currently using like fossil fuels, you have to essentially have a dedicated outlet nearby that equipment so that in the future, if someone wants to retrofit their home and make an update, they can plug in a new future piece of equipment. And why that's important at this stage is it actually saves costs down the line of future retrofits. So in 10 years from now, if someone wants to add in a, like let's say an induction stove, as opposed to like a gas stove for cooking, they won't have to poke holes in their wall to get the wiring through. having that pre-wiring in place while the walls are open are a lot easier to do with the new construction phase, as opposed to doing later on in the later on after the home's been built. So it's including a solar array as well as wiring for electrification, and that's having an outlet nearby for space heating, water heating, cooking, and clothes drying. Additionally, that's actually the requirement for new homes that are built under 4,000 square feet. If you're building a home over that size, which tend to be pretty large luxury homes, if you are building it with fossil fuels, there is a requirement for the home to be built net zero, and essentially include enough solar on the property to get to net zero. So if it's under 4,000 square feet, the minimum solar array size is 4 kilowatts. And if it's over 4,000 square feet, it's enough to get to net zero. And then additionally, when it comes to any additions or alterations in the code, similar to the all electric provisions, there's the same exact thing as the stretch code. There's no additional requirements in the specialized code for historic homes or existing homes. And for historic homes as well, there are exemptions that are built into the stretch code that don't apply or that are still available in the specialized code. So new all electric homes, new existing homes, additions and alterations, things like that aren't subject to the specialized code. It's only new homes that have additional provisions that go beyond what's in the stretch code. So the idea is to sort of promote all electric construction by putting a little bit more in place for building all new fossil fuel homes, essentially. So when it comes to solar PV sizing, there is a requirement, as I said, of a 4 kilowatt array. Now, there are some specific questions we get asked a lot. So if it can be ground mounted as long as it's on site. It has to be on site power production. You can't do it off site. You can either have the homeowner can own it, or it can be used by a third party, like a lease or PPA is allowed. People get questions a lot about the shading of the site. So if there's trees, if the site's shaded for more than 70% of the time, trees, the solar provision is exempt. So the big thing is you're not required to cut any trees down for it, because if it's intentionally shaded for a certain period of time, the provision is not applicable. And then additionally, you want to make sure that the home is built at the right orientation. So if there's a home that doesn't have the right orientation and doesn't have a suitable solar roof zone over a certain size, then it would be exempt from these requirements. So really what you're looking for the solar system is proper orientation where it's going to maximize the sunlight, having enough space on the roof to accommodate a solar array, and as I said, there's an exemption for shading as well. So if it's shaded, it doesn't have to have a solar array there. So just to recap, when you're building a new all-electric home, solar isn't required. It's only going to be required when you're building a new mixed fuel home, and the amount of solar depends on the size of the property. So if it's under 4,000 square feet, it's a 4 kilowatt array, and if it's over 4,000 square feet, it's a net zero array, essentially. So enough, however much it takes to get to net zero, essentially. There are other solar requirements on more of the commercial side we'll talk about. So for residential buildings that are commercial, so like over 4 stories, then and there's multiple dwelling units, the size threshold is 0.75 watts per square feet. And then the commercial, it's 1.5 watts per square feet of the 3 largest floors. And then additionally, when you have highly ventilated commercial buildings, the amount of solar required is different as well. So that's just a little bit of a note there. Next slide, please. So when it comes to commercial buildings, the provisions of the code, as I said, if they're all electric, are the same as they would be under the stretch code. So there's no additional provisions for a lot of commercial buildings when it comes to building it all electric. Really, when the project's impacted is when you're building a new mixed fuel commercial building. So what that involves is similar to the residential provisions. A new mixed fuel commercial building has to have that solar array with the size thresholds we talked about previously, as well as that wiring for future electrification that we talked about previously. So That's just a note there when you're building a new commercial building. It's similar to the provisions for residential buildings, but just the bigger size and scope because there's more to it, I would say. Next slide, please. And then when you're building a new mixed fuel project, or sorry, a new multifamily project, and what that is a project over 4 stories and over 12,000 square feet. There is a new requirement in the code where even if it's all electric or mixed fuel, new multifamily buildings over that certain size threshold of 12,000 square feet have to be built to a standard called Passive House. So Passive House is a third-party certification program that is very, very energy efficient. And so Passive House buildings are extremely airtight, have a lot of insulation, have very good, really factor in all the important principles of building science to create a very safe, healthy home. So there's really good indoor air quality, very low operating costs. So you're gonna have very low utility bills in a Passive House because they're so efficient. So yeah, I think that's just a little bit about that standard. We'll talk about Passive House building in more detail soon, but really just a quick overview is that it's a third-party standard where a Passive House consultant will work on your project to certify it to that standard. Next slide, please. So just some quick FAQs about the specialized code. So the first question is, does the opt-in specialized code apply to existing structures? As we said before, no, the impacts of the specialized code are only on new construction. And the existing structures are still subject to the same requirements that would be under the stretch code. There's a question on, will the opt-in specialized code discourage the creation of affordable housing? And the answer is no, because incentives will continue to encourage affordable housing while the opt-in specialized code delivers benefits for residents. So there are some really significant massive incentives available to projects to help offset some of the potential additional costs that come from building to more efficient standards. There's a question on if it's possible to install a gas cooktop. And yes, that is still required. So you can still use fossil fuel infrastructure in the specialized code, but when you do, you are subject to additional requirements. So if you want to use a gas cooktop, you still can under that mixed fuel pathway. And then so next question is, why adopt the opt-in code? And so the reason I think, and the number one reason, is really that pre-wiring, right? So it's avoiding costly retrofits down the road and expediting electrification by preparing a building for a future electric equipment, even if you're not planning to install it up front. Now, the next question is, will a specialized code affect the cost of building a new home? So if you're building a new all-electric home, the answer is no, because there's nothing else you have to do for a new all-electric home when compared to the current code you're following. But if you're building a new home that burns fossil fuels, there will be some added costs for the pre-wiring for future electrification, for any appliance that burns fossil fuels, and for the cost of investing in a solar electric system if solar is feasible on that site. Next slide, please.
So these are a few more slides on Passive House, and I don't know if the committee or the board wants more information on Passive House, but Mark said there may be more, you might have questions, so we prepared more slides. Would you like us to talk a little bit about Passive House and what might be required for large-scale multifamily?
Yeah, Lisa, I'm seeing nods of yes, so please.
Okay,
Great,
Michael Rossi.
Yeah, absolutely. So a little bit about Passive House. So as I said, it's a third-party building verification program with 2 different options for verification. There's FEIS and PHI. So FEIS is essentially a United States-based model. It was formerly known as the Passive House Institute US, and PHI is a European model, Passive House Institute. So there's 2 separate standards, but are very similar in terms of their program requirements, but they are 2 separate programs. And so you can use either of these standards to show that. And so what they do is, as I said, set energy performance and building envelope airtightness requirements. And so that means that like the buildings are very, very airtight and they have really high energy performance. As I said, very low operating costs, very low heating and cooling loads, very, very energy efficient. I like to describe them as almost like the Ferrari of houses because of how energy efficient they are, if you will. Now, even though the term is Passive House, it can be any type of building of any size. So any building can be certified Passive House, even if it's not a house. And that does get to be a point of confusion sometimes. And now, when you're building Passive House, it actually does not require all electric or net zero in the standard. So you don't actually have to do that to meet them. It's just efficiency through the principles, which include like a lot of insulation used in the property, along with really good mechanical ventilation that can help promote indoor air quality within those tight spaces. So when it comes to passive buildings and how they perform, heating loads can be reduced by 90% or more compared to a typical building. And overall energy demand can also be reduced by 60% or more. And so there is a significant improvement in the indoor air quality and occupant comfort in these buildings. Next slide, please. So when it comes to affordable housing and Passive House, so some of the benefits of building Passive House for these kinds of projects is that they do lower utility costs for tenants or for the developer. So because these houses are so efficient, they have very, very, very low operating costs when compared to a traditionally designed house. So that lowers utility costs as well as energy burden for potential occupants. Additionally, there is higher levels of indoor air quality, which leads to healthy impacts from indoor pollutants. So because they're utilizing balanced ventilation systems that both bring in fresh air from the outside, while also simultaneously removing stale air from the home, that proper ventilation strategy used in these projects really helps promote really good indoor air quality. And that's through an energy recovery ventilator or heat recovery ventilator. Big thing is also comfort, right? You're not going to see the types of drafts and stuff you might see in typical homes because there's consistent room temperatures and there's not going to be drafts because of how insulated the home is and the building is. And then the other thing is that they do construction lasts longer with less maintenance needs and costs. And the reason for that is because building science principles really involve looking at the home as one combined system. And when you have a Passive House project like this, they tend to be very energy efficient, and all of the factors of the home work together well. So you have the right size heating and cooling systems, you have really good ventilation strategies and things like that. And so with that combined with the tight envelope, what it does is lowers the operating costs because you don't have to use more energy to make a system operate if it's not meeting the temperature you want it to. So by factoring in all the building science principles, looking at the whole building as one system, you have a lot less maintenance needs for the projects because they are very well designed.
And I added this Brewster Woods Community Housing Project. If you look at the bottom of this slide, the Passive House Massachusetts, www.phmass.org. Passive House has a website. It has an entire list of affordable housing projects that have been developed. Brewster Woods Community Housing, which appears to have 40 units, is one of those. I thought it would be good to throw in, instead of just pictures of the Kenzie and Roxbury and the distillery in South Boston, which you've seen on some of these slides, but there is a Brewster Woods Community Housing Project that was done, and I think it was finished in 2023, and it was built to Passive House standards. And you could also call some of your neighbors in Brewster on the board of selectmen there, and maybe, or the planning board, and ask more about that project peer to peer.
Thanks, Lisa.
Great, thanks. All right, and then I want to talk really quickly about some of these incentives that are available to projects when you are building Passive House. So because Passive House is a higher design standard, there are some really great Massachusetts or Mass Save incentives that go along with it. So when it comes to the pre-construction phase, so before the project's built, it'll pay, the Mass Save program will pay for up to 100% of a feasibility study to look at if the Passive House is feasible for that project with a maximum of $5,000. It'll pay for up to 75% of the energy modeling costs of the project, just to see if it will meet that Passive House standard. And it'll provide $500 per unit up to $20,000. Also, additionally, if you get pre-certified to Passive House, so the design specs of the building are Passive House, you can get $750 per in terms of what you can get. So when it's pre-certified to Passive House, it's $75 per unit. And at the post-construction phase, so after everything's wrapped up, you for the project, you get the Passive House certified. when you're Passive House certified, the incentive is $3,000 per unit with no maximum. So you can get a lot of really, really great money from this project when you're building new housing because of some of the really great incentives that are provided. Speaking to some of the federal incentives, right now there is a little bit of uncertainty around them, but they are available now, but I think they are expiring soon. But there are some federal tax credits for the Energy Star program or the Certified Energy Ready Homes program. So that is option. And again, I don't want to talk to it too much because I think those incentives are expiring soon. So I'm not going to mention it. But other benefits of it is that if you're doing a low income housing tax credit application, the Passive House apartments are actually awarded 8 points on those applications. And so the Passive House certification projects require that a project meets Energy Star or Zero Energy Ready Homes certifications ahead of time. They make it easier to apply for some of these federal tax credits when they're available. But again, I don't want to speak to them too much because I know they are a little uncertain at this point, but the mass save incentives are still available for these projects.
But that is a good note, Micah, you make about the LIHTC additional points. That's critical when there's a lot of competition for that program.
Yep, okay.
I'm going to end the slideshow.
Great.
And